president of the Echopark Neighborhood Council. We are meeting here tonight at a community forum which was set up as a platform for candidates who put themselves forward in elections which the city is attempting to organize to elect a new board in our area. I have filed as a candidate, although I am working very seriously, including through my campaign as a candidate, to challenge the basis of this election and many of the illegally formulated rules which are guiding it. Nonetheless, I think that it's important for people in the community who have not been as close to the neighborhood council as some of us to really hear and understand what some of these issues are and why they should be concerned. In the course of the meeting tonight, some community people, including a number of our board members, decided that they needed to really actively and aggressively protest in the midst of this candidate meeting tonight. They have many very legitimate reasons for their anger and for their desire to be very overt in expressing their anger and displeasure with the process that they have gone through and that the city is attempting to impose on this area of the city.
Great. Usually don't want to do, I'm not really familiar enough to even have interview questions, but I did hear a piece of language that I want to pass by you. When I was talking to the gentleman earlier, he said that this is the fourth failed board. What do they mean by the language failed board? I've worked with a lot of neighborhood councils. What is he? It's language I don't understand.
All right. There is an element in this community, actually a constantly growing element in this community, that views any board that isn't constituted by white middle-class community residents who've moved into this area on the wave of gentrification as a failure. That's the first thing. What they mean by that is this is a board, these are boards which they have not controlled. So it's kind of like code language. And they are trying to convince a lot of people in the community that this is the case. This is disinformation, okay? There's been a lot of disinformation spread in our community, which I think has a big impact on whether or not people in this community can come to grips with what is needed to ensure that there is a viable and democratic elected community leadership sitting on our neighborhood council board or anything else around here. That's what I think that's where I think that was coming from, and it certainly has been my experience. And there have been tussles about this going on really ever since the process of gentrification began to really pick up in this neighborhood in the early 2000s, which actually was about the same time that neighborhood councils became active institutions under the city charter. So at one level, the fact that there's conflict in this area isn't necessarily untypical of neighborhood councils. And in many cases, what you find with neighborhood councils is that there's a lot of personalistic conflict, a lot of cliquishness between different groups and different communities who feel that their group should control that community or what have you. Here in Echopark, that kind of thing it has taken a different character because of the basic issue of gentrification. The candidates who did speak tonight spoke about how they decided to come to Echopark because of its basically because of its friendly culture and other things. What they neglect to to address is the fact that this culture that is prevalent and has become characteristic of Echopark is really a culture that was produced mostly by the Mexican American working class community that has been here for a very long time. And that community precisely is being pushed out of this area because the property which they either own or reside on as tenants is now viewed as prime real estate that is extremely valuable. And the same thing that's going on with this land rush that is going on in the Echopark area is going on all over town, but particularly in those areas within about a mile or mile and a half of the center of downtown, because we are going through an historic reversal of the trend that in the 1950s carried a lot of people out of the center of the cities into the suburban world and the suburban lifestyle. Well, now there's a reversal of that trend taking place, where many of the upwardly mobile and more economically and socially privileged groups are looking at the center of the cities as where they really want to be to live a decent lifestyle in the future. This has everything to do with the oil crisis, the fact that oil and gasoline and so forth are going to be rising in price and becoming less and less viable as a base for transportation in future years. But even more so, just in general, the fact that the culture is moving as a whole to things such as bicycle transportation, centralizing cultural institutions and so forth and so on, and people want to be close to that, and the younger generation particularly of technically and economically advantaged people are looking at developing their lifestyle where they can walk to work, walk to their cultural stuff, ride a bike. They have no interest whatsoever in spending an hour and a half, 2 hours commuting back and forth to work every day. It doesn't make sense to them, and frankly, if you think about it, it really just doesn't make sense at all, period. So, there's some logic to their thinking, sure enough, and just as this is happening in Los Angeles, it's happening in every major city in the United States, and the way that it expresses itself is through, what they call gentrification. It expresses itself through both the increased valuation of properties that are close to the center of the city on the one hand, and on the other hand, the displacement of massive numbers of people who've been well situated in these zones in the center of the city for a very long time. And that's what's happening in Echopark, and that's really what's behind all of the back and forth that's been going on here for some years now, and it reflects itself in struggles over the neighborhood council and whose views and interests dominate within the neighborhood council, precisely at a time when the neighborhood councils are becoming more and more an institution which the city is investing with the authority to speak for community residents in whichever particular area they are elected in. And they do this on everything from the city budget to the delivery of every service, from garbage collection to community health care, public health services, to policing. Just really every service which the city is responsible for is structurally addressed under the city charter by these neighborhood councils. And the real issue has been for quite some time whether these neighborhood councils are just going to be kind of a cog in the wheel of the status quo in city politics, or whether they'll serve as a vehicle for community people to actually enter into the discussion about public policy and the impact that public policy and its delivery is having on them and their community. This is actually pretty important stuff, although it hasn't really been paid that much attention to. The fact that we've got these neighborhood councils in Los Angeles, and that we have a basis, if we utilize them, to actually have that kind of impact on local politics. And that was one of the reasons why myself and other people in this community decided to test that out and to start utilizing this structure for what we think it should actually properly do on our behalf. And that is precisely what our current board was doing. We did it against great opposition internally from factions that represented hostile interests to that point of view. And we did it against great resistance from the city bureaucracies and local politicians who don't want independent action and expression coming from the base in the community. What they want is a docile community that basically pushes their agendas and doesn't force them to take on issues which for one reason or another that they don't really want to address. And of course this is part of the problem of why our communities have been in such drastic decline over the past several decades. The real needs at the community level, at the base level, are not being effectively addressed, either by politicians, by people in city bureaucracies, and many other quarters, and sometimes simply because it's not in somebody's interest to really do it.
Fantastic. So yeah, I'm just going to cut that in. Is there anybody else you want me to be talking to?
Yeah, I think that
and try to get some information